First, why is this fair? In principle, why is it reasonable that you take money away from individuals who have money and individuals who have wealth and then redistribute it to people who have less? A lot of what I think we heard in the last debate involved people talking about concepts of unfairness without really explaining why it is therefore fair to take money away from individuals who have money. A couple of potential ways you could do so. The first is to note that the acquisition of wealth in the first place was not just. And there are several ways you can make that argument, but just to highlight a couple of them. It is probably no accident that globally those individuals who are the most well off are from a handful of states or have parents themselves who are wealthy. The fact that someone from the United Kingdom is probably going to be wealthy is in part going to be because of class. It's partly going to be because of race. It's because 150 years ago, their grandfathers had guns when other people had swords. These are all parts of the reasons why people became rich generations ago, and that often isn't in and of itself morally significant, but is simply an accident of history, and if anything, an unfair accident of history. Second, the ways in which you are able to acquire and maintain wealth are only plausible because of the work of other people. Why is that the case? I am able to make money because I have been educated. The people who paid for my education were not just going to be my parents, even if you went to a private school, but often other people within that state who have sacrificed for it. They have given up income, they have given up taxes, which have allowed the state to create a functional education system. The fact that I can keep my wealth when I acquire it is because money has been spent on creating the rule of law and protecting my private property. In other words, the fact that you are able to acquire wealth and maintain wealth is not because of you necessarily, but because of the efforts other individuals have put into it, and they need to be compensated as a result. The third reason is the underlying structure of society is itself not just. Many societies, for instance, will create, and the vast majority of do, have things like property rights. But there's nothing natural about property rights. There's nothing natural about a legal institution which protects my property. There's nothing natural about a state of a society which values intelligence over an individual's physical attributes. All of that is conditional, and none of that is morally significant. This is just a handful of the ways in which you can start explaining why the acquisition and the maintenance of wealth is not in and of itself just. And a final point on that. It's not just about how hard I work, because that's not just the way people accumulate wealth. It's often inherited and circular over time. That because I am wealthy, I am able to give my children the best education. I'm able to give them the best opportunities. I don't have to work for 20 hours a day for 2 or 3 jobs, so I can read my children books and improve their quality of life. The reality is that it is often much easier for people because their parents were rich, because their grandparents were rich. And that means that inequality and wealth and the lack of wealth self-perpetuates over time, that even people who would otherwise be very talented may not be able to deal with these underlying issues. All of those arguments, as well as other arguments, lead us to the conclusion that there is nothing inherently just or no reason why you should have a claim over your income and your wealth, and certainly not a claim over the vast majority. That's the first step when it comes to building this debate. But the second is, why is it good? It may be just that we could take away the vast majority of people's money, but it doesn't follow from that we necessarily should. So several reasons then why we should. The first one of these is what I already hinted at, that inequality perpetuates over time, and because of inequality and the lack of resources of your parents, you can find yourself in a disadvantageous position, irrespective of how hard you work, irrespective of your natural talents, if we care about that at all. Secondly, If we care about the total value, the total number of goods produced in society, society is incredibly inefficient when you end up with inequality. One example of this is if you imagine an individual has a lot of talent but simply doesn't have any money at all, they probably are unable to go to university or get themselves a reasonable degree of education. Why is that the case? Because going to university means that there's a huge opportunity cost. It means I'm not spending that time working. I'm not spending that time making money. That is only plausible if you either live in a very rich country, which is very few people, or more likely, someone is there and able to support you. But the harm of that is there's a large group of people who could contribute massively to society, who could help every member of society, who are shut out of the institutions which give them the higher level skills they need to do it. So on that level, it can also be really harmful for all of society when you don't have at least a reasonable standard of living and a redistribution of wealth. Finally, wealth in and of itself correlates with a lack of equality on multiple other spheres of life. When we think about political power, we start with the idea that all individuals, or men and women, should be equal. But the reality, even in democratic societies, is that some individuals are more equal than others. And this is not about the force or the ability of them to argue or to persuade. That's because some individuals have control over the media, the distribution and the creation of information. It's because some individuals have more ability to lobby and pressure governments to do what is good for them, effectively what we call to be corruption. If we care about the idea that people should be equal and should have equal influence about the environment we live under, that is something which is likely to be harmed by the perpetuation of inequality. Even if we do not entirely eliminate it, we are able to significantly mitigate it with a radical redistribution of wealth, and that is the only circumstance where any idea of equal people and equal democracy could exist. These are just some of the ideas, all of which can be expanded on, which I think could be part of the proposition case. Any questions about that? Great, and then turn it to Rafi.
So to build on exactly the two same burdens which proposition had, firstly whether this is just, and secondly whether this is practically going to help to improve people's lives. Firstly, in terms of principal justice, I think for me the most obvious thing to do is to observe that principal justice is entirely relative, which is to say it might in theory be nice if we can have a world where every moral outcome was perfect and entirely reflected our vision of how valuable people were. The reality is that such a world is impossible to construct and could not ever be built in the imperfect world in which humans live. And therefore we need to think about what trade-offs we'd be prepared to make in order to make the world just